it's a great honor for me to be on a panel like this and to learn, as I always do, from people who are on the ground in the struggles that are going on in this country today. I think that one of the things that I can do to contribute to the discussion that we're having is to try and put C51 into a broader historical context in terms of the Canadian state. And I do mean the Canadian state. We're not talking about the Trudeau government. We're not talking about the former Harper government. We're not talking about any particular government through the history of this colonial state. And it is a colonial state. And we saw Trudeau go to New York City recently and almost parrot what Harper before him had said, and saying that Canada doesn't have any colonial baggage. Absolutely mind-boggling statement. Mind-boggling and yet consistent in terms of the view of the ideology that's put forward by the Canadian state and always has been. C51 is racism and Islamophobia in the service of militarism and war. Surveillance, infiltration, all the dirty tricks that CSIS uses, that the RCMP used before CSIS was created, and going backwards through Canadian history. These are weapons in the arsenal of state machinery, and this state machinery could be dictatorships like Egypt today, right over to the liberal democracies like Canada or the United States. One form or another of these programs are used in all of these states and all of these countries. How else would ruling minorities, elites, hope to monitor and stifle dissent among exploited and oppressed majorities, the majorities of people in all of the countries who are the subject to things like Bill C51. Absolutely clear that these things specifically target particular communities. And so we're not painting this in the language of the typical liberalism, but it is absolutely true that, the old saying that today they come for the Muslims, tomorrow and on down the line. Especially in times of war, when the facade of diplomacy is lifted and the true brutality of states are unleashed, the premium is placed on silencing and crushing any domestic discord that threatens national unity, the national unity that the state wishes to create. And in a way, Bill C51 is it's specific, it's different, it's particular to the time, but it's also not anything new. We've seen a whole history of laws, of special laws that have been passed by the state in the past, including the War Measures Act, and in some ways these provisions and laws have been the language and the branding of them have been sort of soured by their use in the past. And so we have, as we're moving into a circumstance, I think, where we have unlimited war, war without end, war without a particular, and a war against terror as opposed to a specific national war. We are moving away from War Measures Act. And so we have all the powers of the War Measures Act of the past taken away from the word war. So now that we have war without end, we'll have surveillance without end, a War Measures Act without end. Okay. Well, the War Measures Act was first brought down in 1914, specifically to aid in the fighting of Canada's first big imperialist participation in the First World War. It basically gave the federal government full authority to do pretty much anything it wanted without having to go to Parliament and to have it legalized. Everything deemed necessary, quote, For the security, defense, peace, order, and welfare of Canada. The War Measures Act gave the federal government sweeping emergency powers. It allowed Cabinet to administer the war effort without accountability to Parliament, without regard to existing legislation and civil liberties. It gave government additional powers of media censorship. They don't even really need that anymore. I mean, the media is so compliant, but nonetheless, arrest without charge, deportation without trial, the expropriation and control and disposal of property. So, if you were an enemy of the state, designated by that, and believe me, it was easy to become an enemy of the state. Anyone acting in a suspicious manner was an enemy of the state. Anybody accused of, quote, being undesirable. I mean, that's pretty vague stuff. But in a way, it's the language of C51 today is equally vague. They can use it. I mean, they don't want to have language that actually defines these things. They want to keep it vague. So if you were undesirable, if you were suspicious, you could be deported without trial. You could be thrown into jail without charge, and you could have all of your possessions and wealth expropriated by the state. There was a creation of an enemies alien registry. Mostly this was recent immigrants, European naturalized Canadians, people who had become Canadian citizens in a previous wave of immigration that had mostly come from Eastern Europe. Over 80,000 naturalized Canadian citizens, the majority Ukrainian, but also Germans, other Eastern Europeans, Latvians, people from, if you're from Sudbury, you know the history of the Finnish community and the hard rock state there. 80,000 people on an enemies list. The creation of concentration camps in the First World War II, and I should say that these things, the War Measures Act and the slave labor camps that went along with it, didn't just end when the war ended in 1918. They extended for 2 years beyond that. The slave labor camps did things like build national parks, railways, roads. If you've been to Banff, Jasper, you've enjoyed the fruits of slave labor. The camps, as I say, continued for 2 years past the war due to the fact that they were profitable for the corporations, the mining corporations, et cetera, et cetera. Following the Winnipeg general strike, and there was a wave, despite all of this, a wave of radicalization among the Canadian working people following the war, culminating in the Winnipeg general strike in 1919. Special measures were introduced to allow for the deportation of undesirables following that as well, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that's worth mentioning about the War Measures Act, which was also imposed again, that people realized in the Second World War, was that it was used to basically steal and appropriate treaty land that had been given to First Nations people. And the history of the Ipperwash, the murder of Dudley George, is directly related to the land stolen from the Stony Creek people by the War Measures Act. 1930s, Red Scare, anti-unionism. Basically, the government passed laws that said that any organizations that threatened the state or the economic circumstance, the language is almost identical to that that's found in Bill C51, were declared illegal. And there was a roundup of 9 people from the leadership of the Canadian Communist Party, including Tim Buck. There was an attempt, that happened in 1931. There was an attempt to assassinate Tim Buck in prison that backfired badly because people didn't go underground. They didn't worry about the fact that they were illegal. They organized mass rallies. They organized, Tim Buck ran from prison, ran for elected office. When he was freed from prison, he ran in this riding and almost won a seat on city council with hundreds of thousands of votes. They organized openly as communists, but basically also organized to say that it was the right of Canadian working people to organize, to push, and to demand change from the Canadian state. There's an awful lot to talk about in terms of the use of the War Measures Act and powers during the Second World War, the internment of Japanese Canadians into forced labor camps, and perhaps we can get into more of these things in discussion. But one of the things that I think is not so well known about the use of the World War II special government powers was the economic powers that it was given to end strikes and lockouts, to basically force workers to accept any kinds of working conditions, and to have their collective agreements imposed on them by the government. Okay, so much to talk about in terms of the history, because there's such a disgraceful history of this. I can't even really get into the history of the War Measures Act use in 1970 in the October crisis that coincided with a program that was going on in the United States called COINTELPRO, a use of the state to drive a wedge and break up the growing unity between Black Power movements, civil rights movements, the environmental movement, et cetera, to the use of secret government policies to break, up to and including the use of assassination, to drive a wedge and break the growing unity between those kinds of organizations and those kind of movements, the kind of the unity that actually throws the greatest scare into all of the government. When we talk about the Bill C51, we also want to mention something about the Communications Security Establishment in Canada, which is a new building, a new facility that's being built in suburban Ottawa. $1.2 billion of our money has gone to create a new super surveillance headquarters. There won't be a fireplace there. I don't know if people read about this. When the CBC first announced and described what was going on, they described this place, it sounded like a ghoul headquarters, or, which conversation pits where all of the spooks would get together and meet each other and have latte and whatnot around a big open gas fireplace. And the CSIS came back the next day and said to the CBC, "We challenge your, there will be no fireplace." There will be no fireplace. Okay, that headquarters is bigger than the Air Canada Centre, and its cost would have built the number of big city hospitals that we need in this country. And it'll cost, as I say, $1.5 billion to build, but it'll cost $3 billion over the next 30 years to maintain. Where did CSIS come from? CSIS came from the fact that the RCMP was so scandal-ridden with dirty tricks, burning barns, illegal arrests, infiltrating organizations that were perfectly legal as agent provocateur. A commission in the 1970s found that the RCMP was so compromised that we had to create something new, something fresh, and something that it would have some civilian oversight. The civilian oversight of the Security Intelligence Review Committee, CIRC. And just to mention how much civilian oversight we can count on from CIRC, the couple of previous chairs of this committee, one was former Harper Minister Chuck Stroll, who was forced to resign as CIRC chair because he was also caught simultaneously lobbying for Enbridge, and before him, Arthur Porter, who was arrested as part of a multi-million-dollar fraud and kickback scheme involving SNC-Lavalin, and who recently died in a Panamanian jail. That is the Canadian state. That is a thumbnail history of that C51 is just the most recent part of, and that Canadian state is, on the one hand, it is the common enemy, but remember, one of the things that, as I say, the Canadian state is most worried about, it's when we come together on panels like this, or when we come together in struggles and support each other's struggles, like we did on St. Clair, outside of outside of the Ground Zero protests, like we did when Black Lives Matters did its brilliant occupation It's when we come together and support each other's struggles that the state is most worried, when we do it openly, when we do it without fear, and take the offensive. And that's what we need to do when it comes to C51. We need to take the offensive to beat back these attacks from the state.